We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back here on Liberty Nation Radio on the Radio America Network with senior political analyst of LibertyNation.com, Tim Donner. Now, we've been talking the primaries. We've been talking Joe Biden versus Donald Trump records in office. We've been talking 2028 prospects for Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, the general Republican field, and, of course, Joe Biden's legacy. But now it's time to get down to the nitty-gritty, as they say. There's an election coming up in exactly 8 months. I'm sure everybody's aware of that one. It has been in a few newspapers. It has been on a few broadcasts. But of course, what I think is probably one of the most important things here, Tim, is what's going to happen in battleground states, those places that could swing either blue or red on election day. Because although Donald Trump has a 2-point advantage nationally, a lot of those races don't even really matter which the candidate is, because California, New York are going to go Democrat. Alabama, Florida, they're going to go red. That's pretty clear. But there's a number of states that could go either way, and that's where the elections are decided, Tim. So what's the latest there?
Well, there were thought to be 7 battleground states, and that was pretty accurate. I guess you could still call North Carolina a battleground state, but I think the chances of Trump losing there are minimal. You have a solid lead for Trump of between 4 and 6 points in Arizona, in Georgia, in Michigan. And the big surprise to me so far in the polling, Mark, has been Nevada. Because Trump lost that twice. He lost it to Hillary Clinton, he lost it to Joe Biden, and he's up by about 7.5 points there. So something's happening in Nevada. Now, the only battleground states where Biden is at least roughly even with Trump are Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. So you got 7 states. If Trump wins the 4 that he's comfortably ahead in, he wins the election, even if he doesn't win Pennsylvania or Wisconsin. Basically, if he wins 4 of those 7 battleground states without going deep into the weeds, he wins 4 of those 7, he wins the election. Now, on the other hand, he could very possibly win all 7. At which point, if he thinks that he's that far ahead, he's going to, it seems to me, now we're getting ahead of ourselves, but he's going to attempt to generate a true mandate by spending time in places that are light blue, like Virginia, like Minnesota, like New Hampshire, like Maine, to see if he can run up the margin. But I can tell you this flat out. He never once led in the popular vote in 2016 or 2020. And now he's ahead by 2 points. It basically says if he stays ahead in the popular vote, he's going to win the election. It's just that.
I want to talk about Minnesota there, Tim, because it's somewhere it's often overlooked because this is off the top of my head here, but Minnesota, Ronald Reagan didn't win that in his 49 state landslide. He missed Minnesota and DC. And the last person to win it, I think,
of course, that's because Walter Mondale, his opponent,
Minnesota,
was from Minnesota. And he won it by like about 3,000 votes. Yeah. It was very close to a 50-state sweep.
It was, except for DC, of course, but that's not
for DC. I mean, that's never in play.
So 1976, Richard Nixon, I think, was the last Republican to win Minnesota. But
you've been saying 68, 72. Yeah. In 72, because he pulled a similar landslide in 72 as Reagan did in 84.
Yeah. So the thing with Minnesota, I think this is really important, is the uncommitted voters. Now, there's a lot of Arab Americans, Muslim Americans in Michigan, and they did an uncommitted vote, and that was 13% of the Democrat primary voters. And that was in response, obviously, that was a protest to Joe Biden's essentially his support for Israel and for not backing Palestine. But then you go to Minnesota, where there's a smaller percentage in terms of Arab American, Muslim American voters, but it was 20%, almost 20%
Yeah.
voted uncommitted. Now that campaign had only really been running a week, and they only spent, as far as I can tell, they only spent about $20,000 to get that out, which means it's actually possibly unlike the Michigan one. In Minnesota, it was actually a grassroots campaign.
Well,
Now,
people are assuming
mm,
somehow that the none of the above choice or uncommitted is because of his position on the Israel-Hamas war. But I think a good part of it is because he's just been a terrible president,
mm,
honestly, and it's a way to deliver a shot across the bow, if nothing else, that boy, we got to do better than this guy if we expect to keep Trump out of the White House.
that's what I think it is. I think it's essentially it's a bit of a groundswell, and it's a way of telling Democrats we're not Democrat voters of telling Democrats we're not happy. You foisted Joe Biden upon us when I think it's clear to most people that there's some issues, there's some cognitive issues, and I don't think anybody's really buying all the talk that it's Donald Trump who's and I've heard this in the media. Donald Trump is suffering from dementia. It's Donald Trump who has aphasia.
And
Uh,
all that does is
yeah,
draw more
it does.
attention to the issue for Joe Biden. I mean, it's just really
Mm,
political malpractice, just like naming Bidenomics, which put an exact face on his economic failures and inflation.
yeah.
I mean, it's
There's a
best to just
Bidenomics.
let it be a little more vague than that. You
Yeah.
know?
So with Minnesota, I think that it's potentially in play if Donald Trump can boost his 2% nationally that he has now to maybe 3%, 3.5%. I think Minnesota's actually in play. And if that's in play, then anywhere is
Well,
in
yes.
play.
Well, let's put it this way. There's a couple of signs when a campaign is about to lose or about to win. The sign of a campaign that's about to lose is when someone has to go and appeal to what should be his base that should
Mm,
already be committed, and he should be seeking to expand his base. But Biden is losing his base. He's way down with blacks, with Hispanics, with women, with young people. Um, so, you know, if he has to continue to appeal to those people, then he'll lose. Um, on the other hand, with Trump, right, if he starts spending time in Minnesota and Virginia and New Hampshire and places like that, or even Colorado, that's a sign that he's confident he's going to win because now he's interested in expanding the electoral count because you can claim more of a mandate if you win the electoral college by 100 votes than if you win by one.
Tim, I think that one word there that you use really hits the nail on the head, mandate. We've discussed this before on the show that Joe Biden has been governing like he has a huge Reagan-esque 84 mandate from the nation when it really wasn't that kind of mandate.
At all.
Yeah, it
It
really
was
wasn't.
all it was he's not Trump. That's the only mandate. He's the only choice other than Trump, and that's how he won. But Trump could get a mandate if what he could present as a mandate, if only because of the abject weakness of
Mm.
his opponent.
Well, of course, and the fact that he's been invited back, there's obviously in the shopping world that there's buyer's remorse. A little different to caveat emptor, right? No, buyer beware, that's the right thing. But they've got the remorse on it, where he was in for 4 years, then he was out, and now they're saying, well, hey, he can just come back and say, you know what, I told you so.
Well, I
And
think, if you think about it, when historians look back on this, if Trump wins here, then 2020 will kind of look like the fluke election that
mm,
he lost. If he loses this year, it'll look like 2016 was a fluke, right?
yeah, very, very much so. It will be the hiccup in his
Yes.
presidency. And of
What
course,
I
I think
like to call a black swan event.
yeah, an electoral black swan event. I think that's a great point. Now, if you guys at home, you guys and gals at home, if you want to read more on the fallout of Super Tuesday, on the election analysis, go and check out Tim Donner's writing at libertynation.com or listen to more radio shows. You can catch them on site on YouTube, and we've even got our own Roku channel, which I highly recommend everybody goes and checks out. Tim Donner, thank you ever so much for being here with us today.
It's been fun. Thank you, Mark.
And that really is all we do have time for on this week's special edition, where we've been examining Super Tuesday, the candidates, the quandaries, all the numbers, and everything in between. I'd like to thank our special guest, Liberty Nation's senior political analyst and longtime host of this very radio show that you're listening to, either on the Radio America Network or anywhere where good podcasts are found. Now, I really would also like to thank you, the listeners at home who tune in, week out, and make all this worthwhile. Remember, you're listening to Liberty Nation Radio, which is proudly sponsored by libertynation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. I hope you'll be tuning in next week, where we'll be talking more liberty, more things that matter to you, and examining politics through the lens of the Constitution. Thanks for being here. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.